I'm Patrick A. Reed, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Hip Hop and Comics Cultures Combining program, presented as part of WonderCon at Home 2021. Now, ordinarily, I would begin by launching into a fairly long-winded speech about the intertwined histories of comic and hip hop cultures, going over their common inspirations, their shared influences, and how they've existed in constant communication for nearly 5 decades now, showing a whole bunch of amazing visuals to illustrate this topic. But that's what's required when I'm presenting a panel in a room at a convention center, and there's an introduction to the topic that needs to be dealt with right up front for anyone new in the audience. And while I miss physical comic conventions as much as anyone, possibly more, there is one specific virtue I've found in doing these virtual programs, and that's that they can be viewed as a series. You can go back and watch other ones at your convenience, and we can build straight off of what's come before with just a brief intro, like we're the latest episode of your favorite nerdy pop culture show. And so,
I can't separate comics from hip hop because I feel like they tap into the same spirit and need in a community.
Literally, it's coming from all angles. It's Super Friends, Shazam, Superman, 1966 Batman, Star Trek,
Captain Crunch and Super Friends. That's how I live my mornings.
Godzilla movies.
My father was a comic book head. You know what I'm saying? So it was just all around.
This is all happening at the same time.
and then a young artist from the South Bronx named Eric Orr changed everything, self-publishing a slender black and white pamphlet called Rappin' Mac's Robot, which we now recognize as the first ever hip-hop comic book.
So in other words, hip-hop is not trying to be like, it's not a kid trying to be his older brother, but it is a kid going, yo, my older brother is so dope, but I'm going to take what he did and build on it.
Walking through the city, when you see something like that on the wall, it's like, that dude reads comics too. So now I'm not this geeky little nerd guy that everybody makes fun of that just reads comic books in the house all day.
A lot of times it was like that with records, with comic books, where the cover would make you buy it.
That really started to set me off to think about how I could draw things in action and things from a different perspective.
There was a kind of a seamless transition between the comics and the music. You know, as you start getting older and hip hop is the thing you're into, you go pick up a comic and you go pick up a record.
Mad Lib's doing a project with Doom. You guys should get together and talk about this stuff.
And now that you're up to speed, we can get straight into it with this amazing group of people and delve more deeply into a few specific aspects of this conversation. I'd like to kick it off by taking a second to ask the group for their thoughts on one common thread between comics and hip hop, that of collecting. Well, part of that, a lot of that is digging through crates and boxes for old records and back issues and searching for elusive items. This isn't just a question about collecting in the material sense of acquiring possessions. It's about expanding your library or your portfolio, learning from your peers, discovering new things, trading inspirations with your friends, sharing techniques, gaining knowledge, and effectively finding your place in a community.
Collecting in community is so tied for me. I don't think I would be a collector really if there was no element of sharing the collection as well. Whether it's sharing pictures or getting really excited about like a new find, like that's the kind of way that I approach the things I love, I guess. Like I just get so hyped about them that like it all stays in my head and I love talking about it. And I also love other people talking about it. Like part of the collecting is getting to hear other people talk about their collections. I think like all of that is part of the collection for me. You could have, for example, all the back issues in the world, but like having them and then being able to like share that you have them and share the love of them with someone is such a different experience than just simply collecting them.
My mom's record collection, which is huge, in my mind, and then my grandmother and grandfather's record collection, because these are the two places that I spent the most time of my life there, and that was just in my younger years, and they always had everything, because that the 70s when I grew up was just that type of, it was a different kind of getting togetherness, the barbecues and all of that stuff, like the things that I remember most is, the Isley brothers kind of in the background, and it was like music was your soundtrack. The way that they dressed, everything was like, it was like walking in a 70s movie. You know what I mean? And the records were really essential because it's what people connected to each other. And that was the first collection of, I felt like it was a collection of mine because I was it was my grandma and grandpa and my mom. Like those became my mental collection.
My first intro to collecting, it's funny. My cousin, I reference him so much because he was kind of like my entry way to comic books in general. He was like the Batman kid. He just loved Batman, like any other 8, 9-year-old. But we also used to collect, like baseball cards, basketball cards. I used to carry around a 3-ring binder with all of these different cards, and we used to trade them at school and see who can get the best deals.
We used to have a group of kids, and we used to have to click up, and we would have to have access to all these different issues from back in the day. And then what would happen was we would pool money, and we would just mass buy all these different old issues. And it's funny because that's how we caught up in a lot of these different titles, and found out what happened with Thor at this stretch, or what happened with the Hulk. Then like we caught on and realized that there are a whole bunch of titles that people don't seem to care about as much, like The Tomb of Dracula, or Shang-Chi, the Master of Kung Fu. And we're going to go catch up on those. And we're just going to rack up all of those, or the first appearance of Blade. No one cared about Blade in the 80s. He wasn't cool yet. So we would get those. Jungle Action, every issue of the Black Panther, when he fought the Klan or when he fought somebody, we would round up those and buy those as a group. We were just getting those because no one cared about them at the time. Nowadays, those are some of the most sought after books.
This idea of staying up on the new next stuff, coming out brand new, right? And putting somebody else on to something that you were up on, but they may not know. That's all part of the hip hop zeitgeist. There was this drive or this energy to do that. And that was pervasive throughout the culture. So whether it was sneakers, whether it was frames, whether it was gold, whether it was, pieces on the wall, whether it was records, we all were in this race to kind of accumulate the new next and then have it in a way so that we could share it with somebody else.
It was this interesting thing where it's like you fill in the blanks and you had your friends and your associates help you with it. And the same thing kind of translated over to like records.
By the time I started really collecting records was when, actual physical records of my own, was when we were producing the Far Side albums. And then, it was me and LAJ going to the record store, spending like $500, $600 at a time buying records. And like you could open my cabinets and it'd be like CDs, just tons of CDs. And then at the Far Side, either at the Far Side Manor or Lab Cabin, there was a lot of records. Like I remember Booty Brown had a lot of records, but our records became our records kind of sort of deal, because it was just like, we were just accumulating of what we have as a collective because of the projects that we were building or sampling or whatever. So man, some parts of me feel like there's parts of me that like, damn, I really never had records of my own. But then the records that I did have and I did buy, I had a whole lot of it because we were really, we dove in really deep.
It's a similar thing in that, you come across, let's say, a certain musician, jazz musician, and then you'll hear a part or a break and you'll love the upright, and then you'll look on the back of the record and see who that particular artist is, and then you go hunting for all of his stuff and all of their solo, music and gigs that they did together and records that they made together, and who produced what, also made a big difference. And so, it was just similar thing in terms of collecting and studying covers and eras and what year was the music made and what was going on and what city was the music made. And
just looking at album covers, I would just, because that's all I had to do, you know, like looking at album covers, the, you know, the Blue Note album covers and all this artwork. I was just fascinated by it all. And, you know, like Parliament artwork, you know, or Miles Davis artwork was very cartoon like. And, you know, when I was at home, I would just, you know, thumb through the records because I didn't have anything to do but to see, just to look around and draw.
There was a lot of digging, there was a lot of going back through the catalog, and a lot of it had to do with just like going through the records when we were kids.
But there's a consumer engine underneath that, right? So I have to consume this and be knowledgeable in terms of what it is that I'm consuming in order to share.
It's a part of the culture that it can get a little nerdy. It can definitely get elitist, if you will, depending on what pieces you have.
But, you know, like I love getting it and then immediately taking a picture and showing people, you know, and it's part because, you know, someone going, oh, I never knew they came out with that, you know, or, oh, you know, I was listening to it the other day and it's so much fun. Like that is part of having the collection for me. I couldn't really imagine enjoying them to the same level if it wasn't.
So then, were there particular people who helped guide you and helped create a way into these communities for you?
Definitely Large, definitely the whole DITC, Lord Finesse, Showbiz, and Buck Wild. I remember we went to Japan with Big L, and we went to some record stores, and every other record they would pick up, they'd be like, Farrell, you got this? Farrell, you got this? You got this? And I was like, no, you need this. And they would just hand me, you know, the vinyl and shit. I'll never forget that trip. And it was like, you know, it was Eddie Fisher record and a bunch of amazing stuff that I still, you know, listen to this day. I might not have sampled it, but just hearing these different grooves opened you up to sample different things, hear differently, chop differently. So like definitely like Large at the record conventions, at the Roosevelt Hotel.
If I think about my childhood, I think about Disco King Mario, right? In my neighborhood, Disco King Mario was the dude who had the sound system. He had the connections. He could get you into the Armory. He could get you into the T Connection.
It was a similar vibe. Like, I can't wait to get home and chop these drums and, you know, line them up and see what they go with. And, you know, just a similar excitement that comes with collecting and finally finding a piece that you've been looking for years.
And I know, like, because people are like, oh yeah, vinyl and this, that, vinyl, and the vinyl purist and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But I'm just like, shit, man. You ever carried crates and crates and crates of vinyl?
Yeah.
You ever got to move that shit? You know what I mean?
To follow up and take it to the present tense, the ways that communities interact have obviously changed wildly over the past year. Without gatherings and screenings and signings and fan club meetups and live shows and hip hop tours and DJ parties, or for that matter, in-person comic conventions. So while pieces of hip hop and comic cultures can be experienced on your own, whether you're listening on headphones, walking by a graffiti mural and stopping to check it out, reading a comic or book on your couch, it's a very different thing than hearing music on a sound system or being in a crowd sharing your passions with other people in person. And it's very different to do a panel like this by recording people and editing it together like a mixtape, as opposed to being in a room, sharing the moment, and feeling the audience reaction. So as we're looking forward to some of these experiences returning, I'd also like to ask your thoughts on how communities have persevered, how these connections have shifted, how the lack of elements as innate as call and response in hip hop and the personal interactions of fandom have affected us.
I think we're adaptive and we always respond to whatever environment that we're confronted with or whatever circumstances that we find ourselves in, we find a way to adapt. So I get more text messages now that keep me informed of what's going on than I ever have in my life. So I think what happened is there's this physical proximity gap, you know, because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. We can't be there. And to compensate for that, the texts and the tweets and the emails and all of the channels that are open are exploding. And part of that has to do with people have now the time to do the homework, or they can now read that thing or listen to that thing that they didn't do. And I'm almost overwhelmed with the things that people are sharing, right? Because there's my experience and what I'm opening up myself to, but then for every friend that I have, the same thing is happening for them, and they're sharing it with me.
After the initial frustration about it all, I took a pause to just think, this is a creative space. And in this creative space, you just look around and look at what you've been doing and what you're doing, like, projects wise, and just taking a look at where they are, where it's at, takes, has some listening time. And yep, I still like music. Yep, I'm still doing music. Let me open up my computer. Let me listen to this song. Oh, that inspires this melody or this lyric or whatever. Pull out the mic, start recording, and then you're on your journey about doing the same thing you've loved for years. I've always stayed in contact with my Bizarre Ride team, as brothers. You know what I mean? K Nat will send me a track, or he'll be excited about something and call you up. And we were always bouncing off of each other, because before anything gets outside of us to the world, we are really hard on ourselves.
I guess I'm the type of DJ, like, I really do read body language. I think that body language is it says more sometimes than the words we were saying, So human response is really important, as far as a conversation being had from stage to audience. I say that because part of any piece of art is we want to see, either understand this thing or see a piece of ourselves in it. And I think with live performance, it just offers something that you can't get from a screen. Especially with hip hop, I think it is very call and response. It's a very intimate share.
Hip hop has different nuances to it. And so if you think about hip hop in terms of what it means for a break dancer, you have to be physically present. Like, your art is your body, and there's no way to separate your art from the things that you are doing with your body. So if you don't show up, it doesn't happen. But if you're a graffiti artist, you actually want that separation between yourself and your work of art, right? You want to put that up, and you almost want that anonymity so that you can be amongst the audience listening to people talk about your work without them knowing who you are.
Intentionality when experiencing art and entertainment is really great and really fun, but like, there's also the spontaneity is gone in a lot of ways. So I'm doing it more, but it is more planned and more intentional, both as an audience member and as a creator, right? It becomes closer to, like, when you love something and you have like that great first viewing of unexpectedness, and then you have that second greater listen of like hearing the details. I feel like the digital presence, more so than physical, has like almost shifted that first listen closer to that second experience, because you don't have the audience, the rest of that roar, but like, so you don't have that energy. But on the flip side, that means you can hear those little details more, and then at the same time, you're also like, yes, but all of that is being filtered then through my connection and my sound stuff, and I'm not hearing the way that they are intending it to be heard. But then that's just because that's what happens when we listen to sound. But like, you get a bit more of that, like that second listen kind of vibe of, oh, I'm hearing the little things because I don't have the audience, but at the same time, you don't have the energy of the audience.
When you're in the club with somebody and you're talking to them, there's a different feel than when you're just experiencing them through media or through Zoom or something like that. And I think the Zoom is allowing us to communicate and express things that we wouldn't necessarily do so in person, right? So we've lost something by not being in the same physical place, but it's also given us a way to connect through distance in a way, the same way that graffiti artists connect with their audience without necessarily being a celebrity.
I always wanted these visuals to go along with this album, just trying to put out a feeling of what this album is about in the visuals. Nothing replaces live music, especially with musicians, because there's literally actual vibrations happening from the instrumentation, and sonically it just fills up the room differently. And then you can interact in terms of going out there and being like, hey, my name is Pharrell Marsh, this is the band 13, and I have some t-shirts. And that interaction is priceless. Human interaction in that moment after doing the show. So that's taken away. But I think we've done a good job of putting out the live performances and the material. And it's been good for me because I've always been into film and script and like movie style writing with my music, but this gave me an opportunity to get that off in terms of like, this is what I want to happen. This is how I want it to move. And this animated piece that's coming for a song called Kill, Kill, Kill on the album was written by myself and the animator. And it's just crazy. It's really, really dope. And I can't wait for the world to see it. And I don't know if there wasn't this situation that we're in, if I would have been able to take the time and the care with the visuals like this, if I was traveling the world and just gigging and gigging and gigging, because that's what musicians do.
The way that I would like to deliver my music is with some kind of visual aspect or some kind of virtual feel or tech component that speaks to how we consume the art that is more than just one-sided or one sensory, if you will. Like I want to be able to tap into more than just the musical aspect. So sometimes you grow with the art. Sometimes you grow with the delivery. Because like, you know, when I was 18 or 19, I was perfectly happy with just rapping on a microphone and being in front of people and receiving the art that way. But after doing a show in a planetarium where figures are coming at the audience, and then there's a band component, and then there's all these other things going on, and all your senses are being opened up to this experience, it would be hard for me to do something other than that. That isn't having a full-on conversation with several parts of you, several parts of the viewer, the listener. So yeah, I think delivery is totally just built around intention and what, how do you want the listener to leave your experience, or the viewer or the consumer of your art?
I feel like the community is always like super important, right? And one of the things about like the community, especially around comic books, art, all these things, is that at first it was super required that you had to be there, present in the place, right? As a kid, you met up, you got your issues, you read them. Maybe you read them at home. Sometimes you would take them and go to someone's house, or you would meet at a common place, or you go to your boy's house, or they go to your house, and you have a bunch of issues around, and everybody's talking about what they read, or comparing, or debating, what have you, right? And that's kind of the thing that was born out of the community and the letters, but also what happened on the street, what happened in homes, what happened when writers who did graffiti would gather at the bench. Everybody had their comic books laid out. When you're doing your session or somebody's trying to record off the radio, whatever, there were the comic books played out. But that's now happening in real time online.
Post-quarantine and post being apart for so long, we're looking for ways to connect with each other. So I think those communal spaces that we can like nerd out together are going to become that much more important.
But the beauty of it is that with all these advances in communications technology, we're still able to have a thriving community and for it to grow and for more people to be introduced and for it to be an entry point and for there still be entry points for new fans.
So, speaking of entry points, I'd like to veer off the subject for a moment and talk about something that serves as an entry point for many fans in both of these cultures: the use of sampling and recontextualizing. Now, something like Marvel's WandaVision is a great recent example of this, as it's a project that takes parts from classic comics and flips them, using the characters and plot devices from different stories and constructing something with them that reaches a whole new audience. And that's simply one instance. I mean, hip hop producers take pieces of old records and turn them on their heads. Storytellers use familiar elements and signifiers that create associations in their audience's mind. And then they combine and remix the past to create something new and exciting.
There's all these different ways to approach all of the same stuff, you know. I am a big proponent of all stories are accumulations, all songs, all things that you do are accumulations of your past experiences, whether or not you can trace them to what the experiences were. So trying to act like recontextualizations and revisits and retellings are lesser because you can trace which experiences they are, for me is just a waste of time.
Everybody's entry point is different. And whether it's through my old books, whether it's through cartoons, whether it's through some watered down version of it, they're still going to, they still have their introduction. And then from there, they can seek it out on their own, right? And I just decided from there, especially when my niece and nephew were born, and my brothers and I are introducing them to anime and comic books and different type of culture, that the way we thought was wrong, and it kind of discouraged a lot of people from getting into it, because if this is the way the fans are, I want nothing to do with it, right? So that open-mindedness came from seeing people get turned away from being a fan of something I love. When I think about what happened what if I was turned away from liking comic books or fantasy or sci-fi? What would my life be like? As opposed to it being nurtured and me being brought in and the opposite. Why would I do that to another generation?
What we often understand is that some of our favorite verses may just be over a totally different person's beat, like that we recognize, and it recontextualizes that, and it's interesting. You know, some of our favorite uses for things are when they've used a song that literally means the exact opposite of what the actual verses are, right? And I feel like that's the important thing about doing superhero stories. It's not doing the exact opposite, but making sure you are picking stories where it matters that you're using those characters. Batman comes with certain rules, comes with certain understandings of the symbols, the metaphors. You have an emotional reaction immediately to the existence of Batman in a story, or the existence of Spider-Man. Either way, with these stories, though, the difference is, do you have something worth saying with those characters? In the same way that, like, oh, do you have a verse that makes sense to put over this, that sounds right, that feels right in the moment that you are doing this?
Growing up in hip hop culture and having to deal with purists, which is odd to me, because when you think about how hip hop kind of grew up and came on wax, like, that is not to be a purist after that is just odd to me. But it basically was people that clung to the sound of 1988 through 1996 and said, this is what I love, and I don't want to hear too many deviations from this, which is insane, because we never would have gotten there if somebody didn't decide to step out of the box.
We all know certain points that you're like, well, you're not telling the story if you don't do, you know, these 3 beats, right? But what are the other beats you think are important to reference? In the same way that you give, you know, Meg, Busta, and Missy the same beat, they're all gonna do something different with it.
It never surprises me when people are angry that people are now interested in something when they themselves were like, ugh, when it was out. I'll never forget when the whole Vision Quest thing happened and how angry, I mean, seriously furious people were. If you went to a comic book store, the guy behind the counter, not even the woman behind the counter, the guy behind the counter would always be going off about, do you see what they did? Da-da-da-da-da-da. That's not even how. And I'm like, you're aware that the vision changed over time anyway, right? Like I have issues where Vision was messing with the control cube and an android can cry and Vision went through so many different changes. Then there was Scarlet Witch and Vision, which was released between 1985 and 1986, right? As a kid, like the big mini series that I remember that were like groundbreaking or like monumental for us kids was, you know, Secret Wars 2, Let's Never Speak of It, Wolverine and Kitty Pryde, Vision and Scarlet Witch. And when I started seeing pieces of those storylines in WandaVision and them reference characters from it, it cracked me up. One, because it's kind of fan service, and it's like giving something to the longtime fans, but I appreciated it because it was something completely new. And I knew full well that everything in those 12 issues was not worth making it to the silver screen. And it was not going to translate well 35 years later. But here you are mad that there are a whole bunch of people that care now. Like more people care about that thing that you thought was underappreciated. And it kills me that logic never, you know, seems to permeate.
And I love retellings because I think that even if you surface level think that, you know, these three writers or, you know, three artists, you know, like are drawn to gravitate towards a particular piece of work for the same theme reasons, it's different to them. They were all someplace different when they first read it. They've all discussed it different ways. And so there are no three people who are going to create the same exact retelling. And then you get a cliffhanger of your favorite surprise character showing up. Tell me that's not a surprise. So finding out Busta, it has a verse in this remix. Like it's the same feeling. It's the oh shit, right? Like it's that same excitement.
What? Trey, since this is your first time on one of these panels, I wanted to just jump to you for a moment and ask if there were other formative influences that you're sort of bringing with you to this discussion. Are there other inspirations that affected you growing up or helped influence your path?
Another thing that I really enjoyed, you know, because I wound up being a graffiti artist and a musician, you know, Heavy Metal Magazine, you know, Mad Magazine, geez, you know what I'm saying? Just a lot of these different little things are like fragments of what made me, you know, that video games, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, you know, Space Invaders, Dig Dug, you know, just like things like that, you know what I'm saying? Centipede, just oh man. This is what I was, you know, all about. Then, you know, skating, punk rock music, skateboard ramps.
Kung Fu movies, right? They were playing on East, West, Central Time, you know, they were all there. And every time I guess it was at 2:00 in my neighborhood, everybody would come outside after watching the Kung Fu flicks and we would practice the moves or, you know, talk about the story or whatnot. And I'm sure the same thing was happening in every neighborhood all over the globe. Everyone that had access to that, you know, 5 deadly venoms, you know, we were out there talking about it and doing it. And that's part of the culture too. That's part of that hip hop. That's part of that comic book. That's part of that, you know, that whole, and we all had the same thing. We all had the same experience.
You know, every kid either looked up to a superhero, wants to be a superhero, you know, or you know, I feel like that's what makes them up. Like even like my character Slim Kid 3 and my real self Trey Hartson is almost kind of like, you know, like any of those characters, you know, like either Batman going to the Batcave and switching into his, you know, his situation, or Superman going into the, you know, the phone booth and changing into, you know, that superhero. You know what I mean? It was all relevant, you know, like it's all relevant to our hip hop characters, our hip hop superhero characters now. You know what I mean? And it's really fascinating, to be honest, you know?
Now, when the topic of hip hop characters, hip hop superheroes arises, the first mental association most people go to is rappers and MCs. So I'd like to take this moment to digress a little bit and go a little deeper on this particular element of hip hop, on MCing and rapping. Now, when this topic is discussed, there's usually a lot of focus on storytelling, conversation about vocabulary and speed of delivery, but not always a lot about the other stylistic elements of the craft, about how MCs structure their verses, how they can almost echo comics in terms of transition and framing and pacing. There's a basic psychology of comics, which Scott McCloud famously broke down in his books, about how our brains innately understand how time progresses from panel to panel, which means that when you're telling a story in comics, your tools are the size and shape of panels. The number of panels on a page, whether you operate on a grid or using a less formalistic structure. And it's weird to right now use language to discuss language and realize I don't necessarily have the vocabulary to look at rapping and make sure we're all understanding each other. I'm not sure how to express the difference between tempo and speed and velocity, three things that are usually treated as synonyms, but each mean drastically different things in this context when you're talking about vocal style, when we're discussing wordcraft and cadence and delivery. But nevertheless, these are all the tools that MCs utilize that, to put it in comic terms, define their style and their line work, and that keep an audience listening and engaged.
A lot of thought on my part goes into how do I grab your attention and then keep it. And it's an art, and it's thought about. It's not random for me. You know, I'm like, this groove has me. What are the first words that are going to come out of your mouth? And they better be amazing. And they better be gooey and sticky and a fly trap or provocative or whatever the case may be, to stimulate the listener or to captivate the listener.
To me, our generation, I will say we have a rhythm that is kind of informed by television and the way that the scenes move, the rhythm of the scenes of the story in television move, the rhythm in film. But we also have comic books, right? Because we look at the comic book and in each panel there's a rhythm, right? And then the next page there's another rhythm, and then there's another rhythm, and that rhythm is changing, and we're all trying to figure out which mood we want to be in. Do we want to be in the fast-paced one, or do we want to sit with it for a while? And when you want to sit with it, you grab a comic book. When you want it to move real fast, you turn on a movie, right? But hip hop is right in the middle of those, and it's taking a little bit from the movies, it's taking a little bit from the comic book, and doing the storytelling thing where the pace is based on all of those, because there's so many people that you have to meet in order for them to come into what you're trying to say. So the rhythm varies, the language varies, the tempo varies, the pattern varies based on what you're trying to communicate.
Sometimes I'm like, I need this to be grim, and each 4 bars is another scene. And every scene is a little story. So sometimes I'm like, you know, I need you to listen to the way this is woven into the bigger picture, which is this chorus I'm about to lay on you. Each one of these things needs to have a scene in them that keeps your attention, or a line in it that brings you back to focus, makes you think again.
Greg Nice is another one. Greg Nice sounds like he doesn't know what he's talking about sometimes, but then you listen to it again and you're like, oh, I see why you went from there to there.
You know, just things that sound good, or content that's amazing, or a startling way to start something. It's just so many ways. And I think lyricism is still marginalized to this day. I don't think we don't analyze MCs to this degree, to the amount of levels of what makes someone an amazing MC, you know?
And now there's one last thing I'd like to address today with all of you. There are a lot of comic creators and animators who draw on hip hop. Graffiti artists, dancers, designers who find inspiration in comics and related forms, and a lot of musicians who have utilized comic culture in their work. But when we talk about the embodiment of this connection, there is one particular name that comes up a lot: the late great MF Doom, an artist who name checked and sampled elements from throughout pop culture, whose superpowered skill and masked appearance became iconic, and who forged a persona that transcended whatever human dimensions he originally occupied. He was a man of mystery, an animated character, a legendary performer with a host of doubles and doppelgangers, and one of the most revered producers and lyricists in all of music. And while we could talk for hours about Doom's impact, and we probably will as soon as we're all in a room together again, for now I wanted to not mourn or memorialize him, but instead talk to you about his impact and celebrate how he, in a very real way, epitomized this very topic that we're discussing today.
When you heard all caps and other joints, it was just undeniable, and it was just dope that it was coming from someone so, you know, with the ability not to be pretentious and be behind a mask. And there's comfort in that.
I mean, till now we still discuss his records and still discuss the fact that I don't know how MF Doom looks. You know, because that's how hard he was going with the mask.
He completely buys into this idea of being, you know, the man behind the mask. He references himself, and he kind of like reappeared. So there are so many layers going on, because occasionally you want to be like, you know, this guy was actually in a group before, but other times you just shut up and let it happen, because they're enjoying the music too, right?
We used to talk, it was so much mystery around MF Doom, which is rare for a hip hop artist, because hip hop is such an egocentric form, especially for performances. Like, you know, I want you to see me on stage and then get a Megatron and put me on stage so I can perform in front of me on stage, you know? And we used to talk about that all the time. Like, oh, MF Doom had like 7 shows going on at one time and no one knows which one is the real MF Doom. You know, it's a bit of, it's like he was literally a living legend. Like he actually took that superhero moniker and applied it to hip hop.
He meant to me the ability to shun off a box that has been placed on hip hop for years and years and years, and stepped out of that box and was successful at doing it.
I remember going to Fat Beats, and, you know, there's the Wu-Tang record, and there's like, you know, there's the Raucous records, there's the Hieroglyphics records, there's this indie label, there's this indie label, and then there's this 12-inch on the wall that's a Dr. Doom panel with a word balloon, and it didn't look like anything else. It stood out while still clearly reflecting and amplifying a lot of what was going on around it.
And I think that's due to that authenticity and due to being different in that way.
What I really enjoyed about hip hop of the past is that everything had its own lane. You know, like Wu-Tang was Wu-Tang, and it was hard cut Wu-Tang. De La Soul was hard cut De La. And when you go to those different lanes, you really understand it. Or, you know, Far Side, we were hard cut who we were. So when you see a Doom and the supervillain, it's like, yeah, Doom, that was amazing. And just to listen to how he writes.
Doom's approach was insane in that way. You know, the English language is amazing in that you could do that with just words, goofy, goony, goo goo, you know, whatever the case. You just be like, what, huh? Like, what was that alliteration, and why goofy?
I was one of the people who was, you know, really, 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 really looking forward to that second KMD album, you know, and being an underground head, when we finally got, you know, MF Doom, Hey, Gas Draws, what have you, I was all over it. And I'm like, yo, this is dope. This is insane. And the MF Doom idea, the idea behind Doom, right? And the other aspect of it was that he's using one of the most beloved and hated simultaneously comic book characters that hides his face behind a mask, but always pops up and tries to take back over, right? Seeing the picture of Doom on the microphone from when he was in the helicopter on the cover of Doomsday, him using clips of not only, this cracked me up, not only the 1966 Hanna-Barbera Fantastic Four cartoon and the music, but also the backing music that used to play on every Marvel Sunbow series between 1981 and 83. We're talking about Spider-Man, Spider-Man is Amazing Friends, and The Incredible Hulk. They used the same music because they were from the same studio. And
there's an intentionality about his art that you can hear in the music. Like, he's not necessarily trying to be a celebrity. He's trying to be a artist who creates a piece of art that you now can take home and consume, and it doesn't mean that you are consuming him.
There were so many different layers with this guy and what he sampled and what he did with the music and how he took dollar bin, $2 records everyone had, and he would make the illest thing out of it.
All right, so I have a theory. I've been thinking about this a little bit, and there are certain MCs, or let me say people, there are certain people who write rhymes, and there are certain people who rap. So Doom is a rhyme writer, and that whole art form of putting together your rhymes and looking at it and then repeating it off the paper, or even if you don't use paper, it doesn't matter. But if you are the person who is absorbed in writing rhymes, then there's a technique that you're using called what I call a pivot. So every rhyme and every thought is doing this weird juxtaposition, because you can move and pivot based on the thought, or you can move and pivot based off of the rhyme. And when you have that option and you have that fluidity to move back and forth between the rhyme pattern and the thought pattern, you get Doom. You get somebody who's moving, and then all of a sudden it seems like he's moving left or moving lateral. And then you're like, oh, I see the connection, right? Whether it's because of the thought process or whether it's because of the rhyme, you now are making that jump with him, right? Because there's a logical connection. He's giving you an anchor, and he's giving you the next piece.
Specifically for me, it was just like, yes, you know, we are right. We're not wrong, you know, to be left of center when it comes to what's popular or what labels are trying to get people to do, what's working and what's not working. It's more important to be your authentic self. And then the one time I had a conversation with him in Paris. He was doing like a DJ / Doom show. And I was out there with Jean Grey, and we had a conversation in the green room. And he was just like, yo, man, I'm simply just, it comes to my head, I put it on the paper without hesitation. Music, head, paper.
It was like a comic book. Like you just like running through the pages of like just action, you know, and then how he would say things. He was super dope, man. And the super villain, yeah, that was dope.
Just remember all caps when you spell the man name.
And that about wraps it up for us once again. I'd like to thank these 6 amazing people who've taken the time to be part of this program today. It's an endless honor to be able to talk with you, to learn and bounce ideas around and discuss these things we all love so much. I'd also like to thank the entire Comic-Con International staff, everyone who makes this possible, who creates such a wonderful space for us to all come together online now and soon again in real life, and to celebrate these things we all love so much. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for watching, for coming to these panels in person, for watching online, for keeping these programs going and joining us in our enthusiasm for this subject and for these creative cultures. We'll see you again soon.
Back in the days, this is a conversation I had working at CD Spins in downtown Crossing in Boston with 5 people in the store. And the only reason they were there was because it was raining outside. Otherwise, they'd be doing something else. They just didn't want to be caught in the rain. So they say, hey, let me come in here and shoot the shit with this guy talking about, about Watchmen.
It's definitely like hip hop nerds, but hey, what are you gonna do?